When the disaster is war, why Ukraine matters to emergency managers everywhere. My name is Leslie Wilson, and since 2005, my careers, passion, and volunteer work have centered around many facets of emergency management, vulnerable population assistance, disaster response, and recovery, including over 10,000 hours of field work. I hope you'll forgive me, but there is no neat soundbite to share the background that brought me to my current role in Ukraine. Career positions included American Red Cross Disaster Services Manager, Coordinator for the National Capital Area and a Tri-County area in South Central California, federal contractor doing disaster preparedness at the U.S. Capitol Complex, and interim operations manager for the Joint Chiefs Dedicated Computer System at the Pentagon. FEMA reservist deployed for months at a time to about 10 large-scale disasters. Subcontractor setting up rural COVID vax clinics throughout the state of Illinois for the Illinois Emergency Management Agency. Volunteer work with 20-plus humanitarian organizations, American, Tajik, and Ukrainian, for post-disaster and wartime emergency needs, housing repair and rebuilds, shelter work and management, logistics, chaplain and crisis care, emergency medical technician, EMT, for the DC metro area, summer camp lead, post-quake Haiti. Nearly 3 years pro bono work in Tajikistan, 5 trips spanning 11 years as liaison, consultant, and partner with the Red Crescent Society of Tajikistan, Agahan Foundation, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the OSCE, and many other nonprofits and agencies on local, national, and international levels. Since May 2022, I've immersed myself in the culture, language, and wartime challenges of the Ukrainian people and army to better understand and meet some of their most urgent needs. All that said, I welcome you to a very unique insider's perspective on the incredibly tragic disaster landscape, ongoing death and destruction for nearly 4 years here in Ukraine. This is war. But make no mistake, Ukraine's situation has all the symptoms of a disaster as we know it. A disaster on steroids of incredible force and longevity. But this immense challenge is not a result of, say, global warming, rather a dramatic shift in the global order. The risk of war must be a priority in this day and age for emergency managers everywhere. Slide 2, Expectations. While the slides themselves needed to be prepared several months ago, I've added in some up-to-the-minute research on these topics, searching out the latest news and information of interest to emergency managers and to those who may be contemplating a trip to Ukraine. Be sure to jot down anything you'd like to go into deeper. We'll discuss ways at the end of the presentation, and you'll have an opportunity to keep the conversation going well into the future via our dedicated Telegram channel. We'll be exploring some of the similarities and differences between Ukraine and America, as well as other global forces in the field of emergency management. I should add that the terminology emergency management and emergency manager as a profession do not exist in Ukraine. The Emergency Services of Ukraine is headed by various ministers under the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Those we would normally refer to as emergency managers are called the heads of their particular areas. As a veteran of life and war in Ukraine, I'll provide an insider's perspective on the opportunities and challenges. Opportunities. Even in the middle of war, foreign players and opportunities abound for international IT and technology, humanitarian efforts, reconstruction going on constantly, especially in places like Kyiv and my hometown suburb of Bucha. These cities and others, especially in the west of the nation, work very hard to erase what is called the consequences of war. And dynamic, ever-changing field of military developments in the only free world nation currently operating in a wartime environment, one dramatically different in many ways from what we've seen in our lifetimes. And challenges? Well, many of these are obvious. This is an active war zone. But some things you might expect in such a location really don't exist. There are risks to balance the many benefits of life and work in Ukraine. So we'll take a sober look at some of the considerations. We'll do a deep dive into several examples of ongoing challenges in transportation, communication, and housing, with the intrinsic challenges of logistics woven throughout. And we'll do an overview of disruptions to the flow of humanitarian aid in a situation like a major invasion, with a glimpse at several examples from the early days in 2022. Building a resilient nation, people, and military. If one word could describe Ukraine today, it would be resilience. Resilience has also been the heart of my work, not only here in Ukraine, but prior to 2022 in Tajikistan over much of the previous decade, as well as throughout disaster responses across America, Haiti, and the Virgin Islands since 2005. A closer look at how my ongoing Resilient Village concept has evolved into the resilience projects, focusing especially on helping to build a more resilient Ukrainian military based in large part on American and NATO concepts, now being embraced by Ukraine, but implementation hampered by the full-scale invasion. And do we dare to consider the ultimate risk? What if the war were fought on American soil? A sobering suggestion for an exercise using a scenario based on real-life details of the massive tank column assault and small-town occupation from our neighbor to the north, Belarus, in the failed attempt to take Kyiv at the beginning of the invasion. Finally, we'll explore ways you might consider partnering with Ukraine, followed by Q&A. So gather your questions as we go. I'll not only provide what answers I can, but we'll research those I cannot answer and provide details via our interactive and ongoing Telegram channel, created especially for you. Slide 3, Storms on Capitol Hill. As part of the federal contractor team in 2008, I helped to write the emergency action and response plans for the architect of the Capitol. This included a risk analysis of the likeliest scenarios requiring an emergency response by the staff and people in the buildings, such as the U.S. Supreme Court, the Office of the Senate and House of Representatives, as well as Capitol Hill itself. At that time, never could we have envisioned the storming of Capitol Hill, January 6, 2021. Since that time, America has faced even more unthinkable challenges. The emergency management community, due to so many factors in recent years, is having to rethink itself like never before. And one of those unimaginable possibilities is now possible on our own homeland. The possibility of devastating international strikes, even deep into our heartland, just one of many potential risk scenarios unimaginable a few short years ago. And it won't take a superpower, vast army, or nuclear weapons to inflict great devastation, as we see here in Ukraine. One bad actor with a little money and creativity can inflict the kind of daily death, injury, and destruction that Ukrainian people endure every day. There is so much the U.S. can learn from what is going on here in Ukraine, a place I now call home. It seemed only natural for an emergency manager with a passion to help people and places recover from great disasters to retire to a city recovering from unimaginable terror like Bucha, a nation still in need of emergency response for years now, like Ukraine. However, there is also much more that we need to share with this nation struggling to maintain its freedom. Concepts in emergency services that we, as a nation, have been able to develop thanks to lives long blessed with peace and prosperity. As we entered even more turbulent times this year, IAEM President Carrie Esperanza summarized the evolving role, the priorities for American emergency managers. Emergency management is a professional discipline that requires strong programs essential to national security and public health, support to ensure communities are prepared for not just natural disasters, public health crises, but emerging threats, to which I would add needs to include thoughtful planning for potential new forms of war that are now a much higher potential risk factor. She discussed the front lines for emergency managers, which I would argue can include the very real front lines of an active war, such as the courageous but continually overworked emergency services of Ukraine must endure, almost on a daily basis, in the major cities and especially communities of all sizes near the embattled front lines. Carrie goes on to say, emergency managers are on the front lines of disaster preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. This does require trainings, certifications, and experience, as much real disaster experience as you can get in the peaceful times you live in now. Trainings and certifications are nearly impossible for our emergency services community here in Ukraine. Many upgrades for military and civilian were being explored following the true beginning of the war in 2014. But much of the transformation to Western free world standards, including many of the standards we have in America, has been on hold since the full-scale invasion in 2022. I often feel like the child with his finger stuck in the hole in the dike, attempting to keep the floodwaters out. There is little I am able to do as an individual, working with small groups in key regions. There is so much more that could be done, knowledge shared by the global emergency management community. I've met many internationals, many Americans, that have come here for a few weeks or months or even longer to help whatever way they can. Most of them have few relevant skills, just a passion to help. What a difference people with skills like you have could make, even on just a short time visit, partnering with a volunteer group. A cautionary note: gain all the experience you can in truly devastated disaster zones, ideally as a volunteer in the field with an experienced nonprofit. Work in locations where there is little infrastructure to rely on, even for your own personal needs, before you ever venture into a war zone. Even then, this kind of disaster is not for most disaster responders. Do your own personal risk analysis objectively before venturing into the unknown. Finally, Carrie adds, emergency management requires an investment to save lives, reduce economic losses, strengthen community resilience. What does that investment look like in an ongoing war? Slide 4, Resilience Projects Across Ukraine. No presentation is complete without my ever-evolving map of action. In Ukraine, my current work centers around the Kyiv and Kharkiv areas, hopefully with another trip into the Donbass over the next few weeks to help build resilience for frontline troops. Resilience takes many forms. Since May 2022, not being able to connect with any mainline organization involved in the war effort, I started by volunteering with what became a large and broad array of small, mostly Ukrainian and European humanitarian efforts, from warehouse logistics on the Romanian border to delivering aid to homebound babusias, grandmothers, in remote villages near the Chernobyl radioactive exclusion zone. They were some of the first to suffer frustrated Russian brutality as the tank column was stopped and destroyed along this route in their villages on the way to a failed attempt to take Kyiv. This helped me to learn where the greatest gaps were in meeting the overwhelming needs that have existed since the beginning of the full-scale invasion up through the present, needs that have evolved over time. Looking at the photographs on the top row, you can see the work that began in earnest that first winter after the invasion. I was invited by the Army to develop a type of rocket mass heating system, later dubbed with the Ukrainian name Eco-Peach, an ecological stove, my first field project in Kharkiv. They saw possibilities for frontline trench warfare. Unfortunately, flooding in my assigned dugout at a training camp near Lviv brought the project to a halt, coupled with resistance from the engineer assigned to my team. Although working with some of the world's leading experts on the latest designs and innovation, who also run into similar problems with engineers, the work had to continue privately. However, while building the first system on donated church property, I met a leader of the Women's Baptist Convention who invited me to give an impromptu keynote address a few hours later for their annual regional conference upstairs, something that never would have happened but for the upheavals and disruptions of a disaster called war. Many connections were added to my network as a result. As this network grew and familiarity with living, working, and traveling around Ukraine and border nations, I started to develop more long-term, holistic projects to help build resilience for both civilian and the military. Rooted in wartime need, the ideal is totally self-sufficient green communities, a focus on rural areas where infrastructure and homes are largely destroyed. Each of these communities designed for holistic support of a population sharing common needs, such as a veterans community, farmers, green industry, entrepreneurs, all united in growing the local and regional economy as well toward a future in the European Union. In the bottom photos, left and center, you can see some of the early research and development, Ivankiv, Kolensi, and Hostomel in Kyivska Oblast. While making the rounds of the villages, I had the opportunity to live several months in Ivankiv and work with a small construction team to develop one of the first arch truss structures in Ukraine. It was also a means to breathe life back into one of the factories in the industrial park that had been shut down by the Battle of Ivankiv. In the nearby village of Kolensi, a few American friends helped finance the purchase of a large property where our Kyiv-based team and local residents, mostly our babusias, redesigned a home into a church to call their own. The farmland behind is available to build a resilient village, hopefully combining the arch trusses produced at our nearby factory for economical, easy to build, and very well engineered small homes with efficient eco-peach heating systems, all built around a community center structure to fit the various needs of the residents. Over this last year, partnering with a volunteer team doing deconstruction of homes in Hostomel, I was invited to create an informal R&D lab on a large home site. More about this work later. More recently, in the spring of this year, I had a chance to adopt a small platoon of Hispanic soldiers. At this point, I discovered many overwhelming needs prevalent throughout the military. It led to a radical shift of focus to orient efforts toward building a more resilient military. It also led to my first trip to aid frontline troops more directly in Sloviansk in the Donbass, which you see in the last two photos. Slide 5, Home Base Bucha. On this slide, we'll stroll through my hometown of Bucha. I chose to base myself here for a number of reasons. It's a location that I'd highly recommend for anyone seriously interested in helping the Ukrainian response and recovery efforts, with a few reservations and blaring need for a change in attitude eventually. Lviv is the other major urban area for most internationals to base operations, but lacks proximity to the actual destruction, and of course the central government and other entities of nationwide interest. But it is the major satellite of government and industry connections. The obvious other place is Kyiv itself, which is on average about a 30-minute drive from Bucha. Let's begin our tour as many foreign dignitaries do, often accompanied by President Zelensky himself. On the left side, the top photos appear on Bucha City Hall's official Telegram channel. The translation of the text accompanying them is below. This extremely active channel is the main source for all kinds of events, official city announcements, like scheduled power outages, to reinforce the frequently weakened power grid. Much more about the power of these apps later. This official hero city of Ukraine has been a special international communications team, a team that the city maintains because of the extraordinary number of foreign visitors and workers that come here. When I received my Bucha resident status this year, I stopped by their office. All three staffers, speaking excellent English, are eager to work with any foreign visitors. Only a handful of cities have such an extent of resources, modern facilities, and teams, multiple teams, established specifically to smooth the way for foreigners that choose to base their work in Bucha. As a suburb of the capital, Bucha has the added advantage of easy contacts with all major resources, from government and military officials to the international news media and businesses. The center photo shows the memorial wall behind St. Andrew the First Called, with its glistening white and gold exterior, still riddled with bullet holes. This is the site of the mass grave for over 100 civilians. From infants to several babusias over 100 years old, each with name, birth, and death inscribed on their plaque. Building blocks of this reflective and resilient steel wall. To the right, the view of the International Circle of Flags. The American flag waves prominently, viewed from my window and balcony. My own apartment, totally renovated, reasonably priced, was heavily damaged by tank artillery, which destroyed the apartment next to mine and below it. Although the occupation was nearly 4 years ago, these two and others in the complex are still unrepaired. Next to mine, there is no door, just gutted interior, new windows still taped, awaiting its future. The apartment below, with its blackened hallway walls, ceiling, and explosion-dented blackened door, still look like the attack just happened. When the wind is just wrong, you can even catch a whiff of smoke that can make its way through the systems of the apartment complex. The tragic part is, more than nearly any other city, Bucha received tremendous international support for rebuilding, which continues, though greatly reduced, to this day. Not so for the millions of other residences damaged or destroyed in lesser-known cities, rural communities, many still experiencing active combat in their areas. Recovery and rebuilding will go on for many decades. Bucha still copes with citywide trauma, although many modern mental health programs are continually being brought in by international experts. For me, last summer, it seemed more like an emergency manager's nightmare. Summer camp for over 100 children. As a volunteer, I was the only one aware that an air raid alert had just sounded. Shortly before, I was trying to locate the nearest shelter. There was no emergency plan in place for the event, so I figured I should do my due diligence. About the time I discovered one, which would only hold about 50 people, an actual air raid sounded on my phone. No one else was monitoring on their phone apps. This part of the city had no sirens blaring. I could only coax the staff in charge of the younger children to shelter. It was like an episode out of the Twilight Zone. I've not been able to effect any change in the cavalier attitude of many Buchanans. In the bottom photos, you see my adopted platoon shortly before being sent to one of the most dangerous battle zones after a little over a month of training with an extremely modest amount of affordable gear. In the last photo, the Alley of Heroes. This is about 100 four-sided displays featuring larger-than-life images and stories of those that have died, residents of Bucha who died in battle, and those civilian and military from around the country who died in Bucha, fighting to regain the city's freedom and help keep others alive. The display dates back to 2014, the real start of the war. For me, living in the apartment complex next to the display, it's a nearly daily reminder of my purpose in living here. Slide 6, the flow of emergency aid. 20 years, working many large-scale disasters with different organizations as volunteer or staff, construction worker or emergency manager, I've come to view the disaster landscape as a unique playing field with two vastly different teams, though each with the same goal: restore order in the midst of chaos. This slide is a depiction of that flow of emergency aid in a large-scale operation. The majors are the major relief organizations we know, like Red Cross, United Nations agencies, USAID in the old days. The minors are the small organizations and individuals, often the first to respond, often meeting needs one-on-one. They help fill in the gaps that cannot be met by the larger organizations. The magnets are the high-value locations on this large disaster field, which draw the attention of the major players, including government and, in particular, the news media. This analogy reveals huge areas of destruction that often exist in the landscape surrounding these magnet locations. Often these are rural areas that receive very little aid in their recovery. Such regions, small towns, many villages, exist all across the devastated regions of Ukraine. To add to the challenge, the largest collection of land mines in the world are scattered now across the Ukrainian landscape. The early months were painfully slow for the usual international nonprofits and agencies to get up and running. The major players were not prepared, more fairly, are not structured for the large-scale chaos across a large nation with millions of people suddenly trapped in conflict, fleeing either internally or to other nations. It was months before tangible efforts of these flagship civil society organizations, CSOs, hit the ground. Case in point, a tremendous number of evacuations took place in those early months. The routes were often dangerous, even rescue vehicles subject to enemy attack, hostile checkpoints. Larger established organizations must follow strict protocols and guidelines that can slow down desperately needed work, like evacuations. The ICRC, one of the international branches of the Red Cross, Red Crescent, deemed the situation too dangerous to send its people in until the situation was stabilized. Many civilians were rescued by no-name truckers and vehicles with courageous civilians, including many Europeans that flooded into Ukraine as Ukrainians were rushed out. Many people were rescued in such spur-of-the-moment efforts when no other options were open. Many volunteers have paid a heavy price in destroyed or damaged vehicles, injuries, for some even death. Some lacking proper credentials stay anyway, risking legal eviction from Ukraine. A nearly 80-year-old Japanese volunteer known as Fumi is legendary in Kharkiv. Incredibly, he was accepted by the Ukrainian army in 2022, helping the wounded. Later, he discovered half-starved families living in the Kharkiv metro system, barely surviving on one meal a day. The small operation he started to help them now prepares hundreds of meals a day. Fumi saw a need he could meet and acted on his own without any organizational support. He struggled with lack of proper papers, but his reputation eventually won him the treasured temporary residence permit. Even more, Fumi received the title of National Legend of Ukraine. I'm sorry, it chokes me up every time I hear about him. Personally awarded by President and Mrs. Zelensky. Now, onto a friend of mine. He started something called the Phoenix Project, an incredible effort in Lviv. It's an innovative example that deals with many of the needs here, which could be met by emergency management community. An American colleague in wartime resilience, Jay Rivera, has undertaken a project renovating a large old apartment building to not only house IDPs, but to develop a strong sense of community, to unite everyone in the complex behind common goals. One of his project's most innovative solutions encourages the residents themselves to take charge of conserving finances, so the money goes farther. They watch food finances like hawks. For Halloween, a group of creative cooks prepared a dish with a pumpkin and ground beef. The pumpkin, carved with a scary face, had ground beef, blood, and guts oozing out of its eyes and mouth. The kids loved it. The babusias moaned that the ground beef could have been stretched into many more meals using a different recipe. These types of efforts have shaped my own work among vulnerable populations. About a decade ago in Tajikistan, I met with a representative of USAID about a grant program to help a local group in the Pamir Mountains on the Afghan border. The advice I was given: keep operating independently, under the radar of the government. In countries such as Tajikistan with very corrupt governments, it's very difficult for high-profile nonprofits or other government agencies to get any meaningful work done. It was a refrain repeated in the early days of COVID. While the Tajik government was one of the last two nations in Europe and Asia to admit the virus was in their nation, I partnered while I was in Washington, D.C., with a small group of Tajik American businessmen to send aid in the form of grants to small local medical and social enterprises combating the epidemic, all under the government radar. Ahmadiyat Children's Hospital, silos in comprehensive emergency management. Some of you may be familiar with the bombing of Ukraine's largest children's hospital about a year and a half ago, Ahmadiyat, in the heart of Kyiv. I was partnering with that large Ukrainian volunteer organization, one of the many disaster response nonprofits that sprung into existence in 2022. Many started by young 20-somethings who wanted to make a difference, and have in so many ways throughout the Kyiv area and throughout the country. Knowing I could contribute little on the ground on day one, I followed our rapidly unfolding response on our own very active internal WhatsApp channel. How the leadership struggled to bring in all the volunteers that suddenly wanted to respond to this horrific disaster right in their hometown. Many similar organizations across the city were no doubt doing the same thing. Quite a few volunteers arrived before any official emergency services got there. It was a long time before yellow caution tape appeared to cordon off the main areas of the disaster. There was no hope for preserving a war crime scene. Hundreds of people were running around engaged in whatever work seemed close at hand. It was, to say the least, chaos for the first day or two. Young volunteers, some teenagers, were there sifting through the debris, some trying to get the rubble out of the way, others looking for important items they felt should be collected. But there was no real leadership for how to put these efforts together in those critical early hours. Some of these young people found body parts. I would like to think there were chaplains there, but I never heard of any. The title emergency management may not exist in this post-Soviet nation, which, like several others that I've been in over the last 15 years, still have a very siloed mentality. But the need for help in putting structure to the daily war-created disasters is a huge need with no resources readily available to address it. I'm not the person to bring a coordinated effort to bear, but I truly hope that such efforts are underway even now in the middle of a war. It's not a good situation. There are no obvious correct solutions. Many lives need to be saved. Other lives may be put in jeopardy to do it. When the first two members of my adopted platoon were deployed as a recon team behind enemy lines, they and two Ukrainian soldiers were trapped in the location. Then a bomb exploded near the entrance. 3 were killed. The remaining young man, trapped with the dead bodies of his comrades, was seriously wounded. It was weeks before a rescue team could come and extract the wounded survivor. One of the rescuers was killed in the process. The other bodies still remain behind enemy lines. Months later. War is a horrible, messy affair. Good solutions are rare. Experienced professionals with ideas to help improve the situation are desperately needed. Slide 7, Deep Dive Communications. When I was preparing these slides last summer, I was pretty much drowning in the weeds of my own communications apps, resulting in this crazy quilt slide you see. Let me back up first and give you a brief overview of the current status of communication challenges in a war zone and ways the Ukrainians deal with or work around some of the major issues. Empathetic friends. In the business arena and other sectors in Ukraine, a wartime-driven philosophy of interaction with people has emerged. Empathy is often top priority. Leadership has, in many sectors of society, assumed the role of establishing stability, providing reliable information, caring for the concerns of the people for whom they feel a sense of responsibility. Remote and hybrid work. These structures were imperative given the mass relocation of so many Ukrainians. Digital infrastructure for all communications rapidly developed. Through tools like Telegram, Slack, Zoom, and other collaborative software, digital etiquette rapidly turned 180 degrees from old styles in a pivot towards more Western conciseness, respect for the other person's time, understanding over interruptions, like air raids. With so many men mobilized into military service, compassionate and supportive employee programs arose. Also, an emphasis on training more females for formerly male-dominated roles became a high priority for a large number of entities. Profit gave way to safety and support for workers, especially those deployed. The assertive, competitive atmosphere softened to a more empathetic, supportive, patriotic environment. Service and reliability shared priority with civic duty, mutual support, and understanding. A return to critical thinking. A more mature understanding of communications has taken a central role in this war with the rise of disinformation. Never in our lifetime has there been such a fog surrounding the concept of truth. From individuals to multinational collaborations, the need to have truth prevail takes a monumental effort. Classes teaching critical thinking skills are popping up across the country, although not yet in overwhelming numbers. AI and the proliferation of information. Establishing reliable and high-speed channels of communication that can get accurate, organized information out rapidly to large, targeted audiences. This is a need that has never been more urgent. Out of necessity, Ukraine has taken a leading role in this arena. The move toward AI has already exploded into many areas of business, government, and the military. As usual, the discourse over ethical dilemmas lags far behind. On popular media like Twitter and Telegram, official government and news media outlets have proliferated and exploded with 24/7 news streams. These are often open to comments, leading to a continual bombardment of news and quasi-news updates, once again with essential truths often drowning in a sea of noise. To bring the discussion current for this presentation, I confess to having OD'd on news on several occasions, forcing a fasting from all news for therapeutic periods of time. Unfortunately, with artillery explosions now a frequent occurrence, and usually in the middle of the night, news nuggets like the phone app for air raid alerts are still set to vibrate around the clock. Returning to our slide, we'll briefly discuss the three most popular apps today. Telegram, though off limits for any official military usage and much of the government's work, lingering Russian connections, it's still the most popular news communications tool in Ukraine. Telegram offers more features like large groups, organized subtopics, and public channels, but only enables end-to-end encryption for secret chats, quote unquote. Signal, on the other hand, prioritizes security over convenience and extra features. The military recommends it for their soldiers and demands Signal for more official communications. It is currently considered the most secure of the three popular apps, but lacks a lot of the bells and whistles of Telegram. WhatsApp, especially group chats, are popular among English-speaking expat humanitarians. In Kyiv and Kharkiv, they cover everything from logistical sourcing, transportation, housing, and where to get the best insurance, to first-person videos and reports from areas under active bombardment, often with help offered to those in need. It was one of these groups that helped me find rides from Bucha to Kharkiv, with a British used car salesman driving cars down to Ukraine for humanitarian use, an excellent man, and a Canadian humanitarian living alternately in the Bahamas and Kharkiv. The rest of the apps. SMS still has its place, as well as Viber. These two are still used by many businesses and government groups to send official communication, although they lack the features of the first three. Facebook, of course, has its own messenger as well. Air raid alerts. Urgent life and death information needs to be shared quickly, reaching the nation's entire population. Nowhere was the need and the lack more apparent than in getting timely air raid alerts out, especially in the early days. The apps, like my current one, have evolved greatly over the last few years. In many cases where central government sources were lacking, local residents and ad hoc concerned citizens groups often picked up the slack and produced needed maps or signage for shelters. Eventually, very sophisticated apps with these locations and other critical information became available for smartphones. These were soon followed by multiple Telegram channels, official and unofficial, sharing important information like artillery trajectories, likely targets, and ETAs, often with citizen comments texting explosion locations, sightings, and sound overhead, often with photos and videos, generally discouraged since enemies use the channel as well to gain useful information. But it does help to know if you can catch another hour's sleep before the bomber that just took off from Belgorod would be reaching your location. While many have English versions or translations available, increasingly, I found the need to pull information from pure Ukrainian channels, which has the added benefit of improving my common language skills. Although the Ukrainian equivalent of four-letter words is a bit more than I bargained for, but does help me to understand the intensity of the conversations around the nation. Starlink and Europe's answer. Starlink has been a major game changer for the Ukrainian military and government, even available on some inner-city trains now. However, it's unreliable. In 2022, during key military operations, it was intentionally shut off. Other breaks have led Ukraine to start partnering for a more reliable system with Europe. Major global challengers to Starlink in the satellite internet market include systems under development in Europe and China. However, the new European version will not be available until likely 2027. China's probably somewhat later. Slide 8, Deep Dive Transportation. For anyone whose life revolves around their car or truck or other personal vehicle, Ukraine may be a culture shock. While many internationals and locals still get around by car, the dangers of bad roads and drone attacks, especially near battle zones, make for a short lifespan for tires and vehicles, and sometimes their occupants. Jumping clear of your vehicle is part of driver safety if a drone is pursuing you. The laws regarding purchasing or renting European or Ukrainian vehicles, even just driving, if you have an American license, can be quite messy. While many assume that just getting an international permit from AAA is sufficient, the laws of Ukraine require you to pass a Ukrainian driver's test. It doesn't seem to be a rule strictly observed. However, red tape can be extremely messy here. Crossing the border. Problems may plague you at the border crossings as well. Ukraine State Border Guard Service reports that more than 1 million foreigners entered Ukraine in the first half of 2024 alone. There have been numerous incidents of Russian sympathizers and saboteurs trying to enter or leave the country, not to mention males subject to potential draft, most of whom are not allowed to leave Ukraine. Since I don't carry the credentials of an organization allowed to invite internationals into Ukraine, I always cross the border armed to the teeth with photos and samples of the work I've been doing, accompanied by business cards, letters, or lists of prominent contacts willing to vouch for me. Wearing or displaying appropriate gear or clothing with earned insignias or patches never hurts. My carefully arranged, very businesslike leather portfolio of full-size color photos of work with babusias in villages, work with the army, a map of my travels, like you saw earlier, has even brought tears to the eyes of one border guard. I used to consider a smartphone full of photos, videos, and links to my YouTube channel, website, LinkedIn was sufficient. However, some trains may not have power plugs and often no internet. I have been caught on these 14-plus hour trips with a dying phone. The whole ordeal usually ends in heartfelt thanks for my service to Ukraine. Since February, however, I now have temporary residence permit, simplifying the whole process with one plastic card. Even better when I finally log into DIA. I wish we had time to talk about that. However, on one wintry day leaving the country, on the last day allowed for my 90-day visa-free period, I forgot that the train did not make the border crossing until the next day, making me technically illegal by a few hours. The guards hauled me and all my luggage off the train, where I sat waiting outdoors in the cold for almost an hour while they did a deep search through my electronic file for my time in Ukraine. It didn't earn me any points with the hundreds of train passengers delayed by the whole ordeal. There are many other potential problems with train travel, frankly with any travel, coming into, leaving, or within the country. If anyone wants more detail, remember Q&A and our Telegram channel link. Also, for more on the international travel process, which has been changing dramatically over the past year. Problems notwithstanding, public transportation into Ukraine, cross-country, and within cities largely relies on public transportation. This includes trams, trolleybuses, taxis, even Uber, and similar services in the larger cities. Multiple uses for the metro stations. As you can see in the top layer of pictures there is an excellent metro system in the capital and several of the larger cities. These also serve as some of the best and most used shelters in times of air attacks. Much of Kyiv's metro system was built at the height of the Cold War to serve also as shelters from nuclear blast. The second deepest metro station in the world is in Kyiv. During a recent air raid alert, I discovered that I could enter the massive underground system for free during the alert. Interestingly, people that were taking transportation at the same time, and not just sheltering, paid as usual, although it was not necessary. These are probably the same people that refuse to walk on grass even during massive government protests, which are an incredibly effective democratic instrument invoked by the citizens to effectively present their views to the government when it misbehaves. Witness the Maidan Revolution of Dignity in 2013 and 14, which firmly planted Ukrainian feet on the path to freedom. In Kharkiv during the war, the metro system is so indispensable to its beleaguered citizens that services are free. The first photo on the top right, the first photo on the left side of the top row features the recently built underground schools in the metro system to provide real classroom experience safely for children, many of whom have not been in a school setting since COVID began. There were children welcomed to school in grade 3 that had never stepped foot in a classroom before. This has been an extremely well-coordinated and engineered feat to provide these children with much-needed community experience, studying side by side, working, playing, with many classmates they may only have seen on a computer screen. Bus and train replace the plane. No planes flying for nearly 4 years. Only military craft. A rare sound, unfortunately. Not nearly enough, but enough to keep remaining Russian craft confined to the border regions and Ukrainian major conflict zones. And the constant threat of drones, missiles, causing great destruction, death, interdependent to terrorize people. Rail network. Ukraine has a well-developed and powerful transport system. This infrastructure that included railway, marine, river, road, air, and pipeline transport. The damage and destruction of transport infrastructure in Ukraine is a major problem for shipping and delivery of goods and people throughout the nation and beyond. However, many wartime systems are in play to ease that gap. Immune for the early years, there have been several recent missile attacks on passenger trains, the primary mode of intercity travel for many. Incredibly, despite frequent air alerts, passenger trains, often carrying wounded soldiers and evacuees, run on schedule. This is more than I can say for cross-country train trips I've taken in America recently. Last week, following a night of hundreds of aerial attacks, Ukraine's main railway published a public apology for the minor delays to some passenger trains caused by the attacks. Simply incredible. Railway workers are known as some of the great heroes of Ukraine. The critical need for integrating Ukraine's railways into the EU network is complicated by a different rail gauge. Only recently has one set of tracks from Poland into Kyiv finally been developed to smooth the way for the only decent transportation for official dignitaries. There is a long road of rail conversion ahead, which will have significant impact on Ukraine's economy and development of investment in the future. On the top right, you can see one of the several bridges being rebuilt along the routes between Kyiv and the Belarusian border. Most were blown up by Ukrainian defense forces to prevent the Russian tank columns from capturing the capital. There was some significant damage, flooding mostly, but nothing compared to the Kakhovka Dam. This is another story. The dam was severely damaged in June 2023 while under Russian occupation, causing massive flooding downstream, an environmental catastrophe, and a humanitarian crisis. Destruction resulted in the loss of over 11,000 tons of fish, damage estimated at $14 billion US, deaths and displacement for tens of thousands of people, with long-term impacts on a vast ecosystem affecting wildlife, water supply, and agriculture. Mail systems. There is no simple economical method to get packages from somewhere in America, for example, to Ukraine. The best method I've found so far has been to use the global carrier MEEST, M-E-E-S-T. They have an online portal that you can register on. Then you can drop off any package at any FedEx or request an online order to be sent to the MEEST portal. There are 2 locations in America. From there, MEEST can forward it to over 7,000 locations throughout Ukraine through a partnership with Nova Poshta, the largest, most commonly used mail delivery system throughout Ukraine, with offices still active near the front lines. There are other systems. If you're interested in more details, I'll be happy to provide some in our Telegram channel. Independent logistical services. I hate to pin a label to this section. As with mail deliveries, there are many service providers, some big names globally, like DHL, who failed to deliver a package sent to me at great expense via a contact in Germany. My discussion here is really just a catch-all, more for individuals and minor humanitarian enterprises, Ukrainians and internationals alike. Many rely on these by word of mouth, often the procurement of services happening through various WhatsApp or Telegram groups, as we saw in the communications slide. Any of us involved in services, like translation or the movement of goods or people around Ukraine and border countries, have assembled our own vetted networks, carefully guarded but freely shared with reliable individuals and organizations. A word on GPS, pros and cons. We rely heavily on GPS to get around. Sharing your GPS location with trusted individuals or someone directing you to their location can be invaluable, even life-saving in the event of an attack. However, we are warned to turn off tracking where enemies of the state might make use of info, photos, current locations, routes traveled, etc. Sharing photos with location ID, especially over the internet, may even serve enemy purposes. Slide 9, Deep Dive Housing. It's impossible to come up with an accurate figure for the number of homes severely damaged or destroyed in Ukraine. One conservative official figure sets it at 231,000. Other respected estimates, more realistic however, range as high as 2.5 million. This is roughly 13% of the total housing stock of the entire nation. Any way you look at it, the scale of destruction remains one of the biggest recovery challenges for Ukraine, one of the highest priorities for the government. A recent survey of refugees and internally displaced people, IDPs, conducted by the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, indicates that the 3 greatest barriers to returning are security, livelihood, and adequate housing. The solution cannot wait until peacetime. Ukraine is not waiting. Thousands and thousands of homes are under repair or being built at any given time across the country. This slide shows a collage of our Hostomel R&D Center, where I have the opportunity to partner with a volunteer group to repurpose war debris on a destroyed home site, establish a testing ground for a state-of-the-art off-grid heating system, EcoPeach, that homeowners can build themselves or in community at very low cost. Explore other repurposing uses of war debris. research other off-grid technologies to reduce or eliminate dependence on destroyed or damaged infrastructure, and create potential for green industry to meet EU standards moving into a peace-filled future. Groundbreaking work in Hostomel and Ivánkiv is one small piece of the housing puzzle. Put together, the resilient village concept has the potential to address all three barriers to sustainable and dignified return. One small footprint innovation, empowering Ukrainian homeowners throughout the nation to create their own solutions, especially where outside help will not be available for many years to come. Dilemmas. Along the way, I discovered that we were also dealing with some very toxic material, asbestos. As I researched the matter, I discovered that about 60% of Ukrainian homes had asbestos roofs and various other asbestos components. Now, much of it is broken, crushed, and pulverized into a fine, highly toxic dust. The common solution is to truck it away using heavy equipment to ever-growing mountains of toxic debris. The quantity of asbestos also implies a trail of toxic dust en route. Cleanup volunteers regularly encounter heavily damaged asbestos tiles. Most of them are unaware of or unconcerned by the health risk. Partnering is just beginning with a Kyiv University civil engineer who is associated with Miyamoto. This organization recently published research on Ukraine's looming asbestos toxic disaster. We discussed the best asbestos solutions, in many cases, to encase it safely as close to the original site as possible. This is a technique we started to develop through our natural cob construction techniques for eco-peach and other natural building constructions, basically entombing the dust and broken tiles, much like the sarcophagus built at Chernobyl. And in that group of photos on the upper left side of the screen, you can see the area of what could potentially be a cob bench for a heating system. In this case, since we were just practicing the skills, we built an outdoor structure. Embedded within it is part of that mountain of war debris that you see off on the top right side, and another one in the bottom picture, far beyond near that long blue wall to the back section of the property. But within, in that upper left corner, you can see that I'm pouring the debris very carefully, wetted down, debris that contains asbestos pieces and a lot of the fine dust floating around that area, which no doubt contains asbestos dust. Far greater precautions are needed to be taken. When I was doing that photo, I was not aware, as the rest of the volunteers working there, that we were dealing with asbestos dust. At my age, that's not a great concern, but for most of those very young people, 20 years down the road, this could be a major health issue. So, while there is the dilemma of whether those repaired or rebuilt homes might sustain another attack, the need for housing during this long war far outweighs such potential problems. The need is now for our own emergency management community, with their equipment and their know-how, to come in and partner to clean up these dangerous debris sites and rebuild homes and infrastructure to sustain the population and take the burden off of other nations like America for handling refugees. Many refugees who would be willing to return to Ukraine even now if those primary barriers can be overcome. This brief overview does not have the time to go into even a small part of all the factors involved. But for anyone serious about being part of the solution now, I am open to continuing the discussion offline. Slide 10, out-of-the-box solutions. So how do we start? Large urban areas are more challenging than rural. The restoration of these major hubs for survival of the nation are certainly of highest priority. Yet the destruction of much of the infrastructure, the majority of dwellings in some, will delay large-scale reconstruction in many urban as well as rural areas for decades to come. Yet even now, pockets of survivors live as best they can under dire conditions, struggling with very little outside help. Their reasons for staying are many. Their ability to survive, despite great obstacles, demonstrates many creative, often simple solutions. We've already explored unique ways to leap out of the box of well-established conventional wisdom in rebuilding. The need to raise standards for ecological reconstruction, a demand for EU membership, is a powerful motivating force to reinventing the new Ukraine, a need embraced by many forward-thinking Ukrainians. This is a creative force that is the Ukrainian undercurrent for innovation in every sector of the economy. I would argue that it is one of the major factors that keeps Ukraine moving forward, even in the face of long years of ongoing destruction. The solutions needed must involve compromise. Thinking small may be necessary, even though big is preferred. A lot could be learned from the tiny house movement in America, for example. Best must give way to sufficient, perhaps for long-term, even permanent. Permanent versus temporary. Even in the midst of destruction, we must try to devise solutions that may well become permanent. Many people are facing major decisions, trying to survive for years in small prefab homes, never designed for years of daily living. Our own memories of Katrina and frequent Gulf Coast destruction, same areas, disaster after disaster, year after year, have caused us to grapple with these types of housing solutions, coming up with many innovative ideas we need to share with this world. Expensive versus affordable. Unlike America, Ukraine must turn to the most affordable solutions possible. This is the situation across the world in most nations following disasters and wars. America and a handful of other nations are the only ones in a position to explore and develop the best solutions to help a struggling world. Concrete versus creative rock. This is at the heart of the work in Hostomel that I did, especially when a concrete producer, seeing all the broken bricks and concrete chunks I was hoarding instead of sending out to the dumpster, tried to coax the pile away from the homeowner to create slightly greener concrete. Still a major polluting process. H2O, 3 to 5 days stored versus harvest forever. Part of off-grid explorations for our resilient village communities involves the various ways to harvest water and make it potable. Harvesting not just rainwater, but even methods that are used in desert countries are capable of producing much water literally out of thin air. Here in Ukraine, where the war has taken its heaviest toll, underground aquifers have been contaminated. To what degree, we really don't know. But even if we can get down to deeper areas for obtaining our water, dangers may still exist because of the elements of war decaying up on the surface. We must be looking to ever greener solutions here as well. Toxic dumps versus local containment. Here I'd mention again the great asbestos challenge, which is just one of many nightmare scenarios unfolding in Ukraine. We need to keep in mind that simpler, innovative solutions are needed to handle vast quantities of toxic debris. There are solid steps we can take today to begin a gradual shift in mindset. Let's start planning for the impossible. Preparedness for a massive cultural shift, there I said it, could be a breath of fresh air, a wake-up call desperately needed for healthier living across this planet. Ukrainians are being forced into such decisions now. It could be the best impetus to effect such reform. Like Jay's Phoenix Project, a new Ukrainian way of life will rise out of the ashes of war, stronger, more creative, and innovative than any other nation on the face of this endangered planet. Because they must. Their survival as a free and independent people demands it. And now for some last thoughts on kids, boxes, and material scraps. By the way, most of my out-of-the-box thinking developed as a child, surviving a challenging life in a poor, gang-dominated neighborhood on Chicago's South Side. I could build worlds out of empty boxes then. Recently, I delighted in sharing these secrets at a summer camp in a remote village near Chernobyl. No great expense needed to empower these kids to make do with what they had, to think creatively for themselves, to have fun without grown-ups controlling all the carefully orchestrated and often expensive activities that generally accompany summer camps. Truly out-of-the-box happiness. I can hardly wait to see what ideas they come up with as adults. Slide 11, Liaison for Resilience. Let's start with Hostomel in the upper left corner. Resilient village. Heat, cob, and home had been my top priority for the first winter. The inability to put the solution into effect was a painful setback. I keep wondering how many lives and limbs could have been saved with a biomass system, affordable, easily built, no need to purchase $200, $300 worth of firewood to heat Ukraine's still commonly used traditional masonry heaters, a cost far out of the range of those who need it most in the villages hard hit by war. Generators for these rural citizens, an even more remote dream. Hard as it is to comprehend, though, far greater problems exist going into this third winter. Resilience workshops. Checking out the bottom left slide, this was the first such training I ran at the invitation of our State Department's America House in Chisinau, Moldova. These have now evolved in Ukraine to cover more recent research, including available documentation from the American Military and Veterans Administration. I also include brief overviews of courses that are available, especially remotely to reach Ukrainian participants, that add great value to coping skills, like the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, ICISF's courses, and several government and military sources in America, Europe, and NATO. Most of these standards have been in the review process for being adapted in Ukraine, many since the beginning of the war in 2014. Unfortunately, the 2022 full-scale invasion cut short the efforts to get many of these down to the field officer level, where they are most needed. Understanding the role of stress in the current situation cannot be overestimated. It's so critical to learn stress management tools, a wide array of techniques for monitoring, evaluating, and handling signs of great distress on a mental, emotional, physical, behavioral, and spiritual level. The toll on the hearts and souls of every Ukrainian and countless others battling the enemy and the destruction inflicted is straining the coping abilities of even the most resilient. And I count myself among them. So, after nearly 4 years of ever-increasing threats to what used to be a normal life, in Ukraine, life on the edge is the new norm. And it oddly seems as normal as my old American way of life did before the world went crazy. The human spirit has a remarkable ability to adapt. But the stress levels, the likelihood of great trauma invading a life here in Ukraine is high, extremely high. Making sure people have the best coping mechanisms to adapt to an often overlooked recovery aid. I started expanding my resilience strategies, built on a foundation of many disaster-related certifications, and then fine-tuned comfort and assistance to countless survivors and workers on the front lines of many disasters over the last 20 years, serving in a wide array of capacities. To keep my own personal resilience strong, as much as help others, my primary efforts have increasingly turned toward a more comprehensive toolbox than just basic PFA, psychological first aid. This is where discovering the concept of PTG has made a tremendous impact on my life and ways that I can help others. PTG, embracing a little-known area dealing with traumatic stress, officially known as post-traumatic growth, PTG. And it has had a dramatic impact on my own resilience. I'm now adding it to my toolbox for helping many others. It's a tool I want to share with you as well. Too recently, to incorporate into this slide presentation, I received my certification to use PTG principles in my own work. I strongly recommend that you consider this official online training as well. This and all other links will be available in the Telegram channel. Emergency managers the world over are among the top candidates for extreme stress, known as distress, that can have a negative impact on our ability to function well. Courses in PFA and stress management abound. I find that using these tools for workshops on building resilience have been among the most needed skills that I can bring to bear, not only on the wartime challenges in Ukraine, but challenges people face everywhere, as in Moldova. A few weeks ago, I also completed recertification in ICISF's fundamental courses, assisting individuals in crisis and group crisis intervention. It's been nearly a decade since my last recertification. The incredible part, though, is that a team of American instructors, including a dear friend, Dr. Naomi Paget, braved the wartime elements to travel to Ukraine to conduct the course at Kyiv Theological Seminary for a class of mostly Ukrainian army chaplains. The whole thing translated into Ukrainian and videotape. Now, moving forward, I'll be able to combine these globally fundamental skills, foundational to the United Nations, with skills of another verifiable tool, PTG, to build a stronger, more mature person because of great stress and trauma that individuals endure. This is the much needed positive approach to those of us that live and need to thrive in a high stress environment. Skills to share with others around us. Skills especially helpful to military veterans and others to avoid the devastating condition known as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Finally, on the right side, you see a very special training with American roots. TCCC/CLS, Tactical Combat Casualty Care and Combat Lifesaver Course, a training program for the average soldier to provide advanced first aid in combat situations, giving them a bridge between the actual combat zone and the medical help that will be available at a more distant location. In this war, that can often be hours drive away. And so these skills are especially critically needed to increase the chances of survival. This is an American military cooperative effort that has developed a Ukrainian version. While costly high-level training is available here in Kyiv and other locations, a number of American freelance volunteers, some civilian, others with military background, are now certified and offer free training across Ukraine, including to frontline units where the training is most needed. This past summer, I put my liaison skills to use to bring one such freelance team to the military base locally, a valuable training for our soldiers that were about to be deployed, but also including members of the now legendary Witches of Bucha, who helped defend their homeland area in an official army unit composed mainly of suburban moms. Several became close friends when I found out about the death of my friend and platoon leader during the training. There is a special bond that grew out of this time that I'll always treasure deeply. And there is one controversy that has grown recently over a critical part of this training. Tourniquets. Absolutely forbidden in basic American first aid courses. Absolutely essential knowledge here in Ukraine. The difference a war makes. Tourniquets have been at the center of some controversy lately. While the proper use of tourniquets does save lives, especially here in this war zone, improper usage is still an issue, one making the need for proper training even more imperative. At a summer camp, I met up with a special operations vet, now with the renowned Azov Brigade, who was showing teens the basics of how a tourniquet works. The purpose? To allay any fears about a situation they may find themselves in, and family members, and to be a helpful, calming observer to ensure proper application by adults is present. It was very rewarding to see how much they appreciated this training, the questions they asked, the seriousness that they saw in being aware of this very valuable skill. Slide 12, building a resilient military. As we saw in the last slide, carefully honed medical training can expand survival odds for those seriously wounded by enemy attacks, be they soldiers on the battlefield or civilians randomly targeted on the home front daily. We also saw that everything else that makes us human endures great hardship at such times as well. And helping my isolated Hispanic platoon of 4 newly recruited internationals revealed to me a few of the tremendous gaps on so many levels that the average soldier, international soldiers in particular, may face here. The situation upon arrival is generally better for recruits from more prominent Western countries like the United States, the UK, France, Australia. However, some of the largest contingents come from nations like Colombia, where arrival can be extremely overwhelming, with unpleasant surprises abounding. From finding ways to equip them with better quality body armor, to surviving necessary expenses, or the need to send money home when they learn that they will not receive their first paycheck until after basic training and deployment, likely to a combat zone. This could be for a period of several months, up to about 90 days, depending on the terms of their agreement. I had about a month to help this group prepare for deployment to an area that was about to become the hottest zone of the war. The difficult assignment ahead was based on the 20 years of experience of the platoon leader in places like Afghanistan, the only one of the 4 with military experience. Learning of his plans to remain in Ukraine after the war, we began combining efforts to make the first Resilient Village project, especially for international soldiers, to have a much-needed place to call home while they were here, and a place to live after the war for those hoping to stay, one that would also incorporate the many needs of the veteran community. Within the first few weeks of his deployment, he was killed, body still trapped behind enemy lines. The situation caused great trauma for the remaining 3 men. I discovered that my stress management skills were my most valuable assets to help diffuse a very volatile situation. It also gave me a chance to work directly with their battalion leadership, both in Bucha and on a trip I made out to Sloviansk in the Donbass. There I connected with a number of soldiers from several battalions interested in the military version of such training, which includes a lot of open access internet material that has been developed by and for our own American military. I'm not sure if we'll be available to go ahead and do the training in the Donbass for now, but I will have the opportunity to train some of the English-speaking international humanitarians that are part of a large group based in Kharkiv, and just recently ties with a number of military chaplains also out in that area, some with more latitude to increase their training in stress management, emotional intelligence, critical thinking, and other essentials for leadership training. After this conference, I'll finalize plans to return to the Kharkiv area since Sloviansk suffered increased enemy attack, including a missile strike on the thermal heating plant for the city last week. This is a time I wish we had a resilient village started out there, not just for training, but also a USO-style home away from home for troops stationed there to relax and appreciate innovations in off-grid comfort where necessary. Some of the best examples of off-grid survival are being researched and tested by soldiers in the Ukrainian army themselves. It's a perfect match for now and for our green future. The deeper ties with the military now may also help find a suitable location before winter sets in to finally start building the rocket mass heating systems in earnest for both civilian and military usage. With so much material available on military leadership, I'll be able to expand training to cover a number of critical competencies emphasized in American and other NATO leadership programs to develop critical competencies for navigating the complex challenges and fostering high-performing teams that the military, especially in a war zone, require. These include highly sought-after skills in any workplace, military or other. Communication, with language barriers and varying military backgrounds, effective communication is a huge challenge. Commands are kept short, often delivered through hand signals. Teamwork. Group coordination is a top priority, especially in combat. Synchronized teamwork matters more than firepower. And other basic skills like dependability, adaptability, flexibility. The research and creativity combined with the work ethic and discipline that go into making the Ukrainian military so much better than the enemy that they fight. The need for integrity, problem-solving skills, conflict resolution. Skills for everyone. Skills essential for a successful resolution to this war. Slide 13, Building Resilient Citizens. It's hard to believe that we are already 1/4 of the way through the 21st century, and what changes we've already seen. Changes that call for a new degree of resilience, of capabilities in the people of Ukraine, people of America, throughout the world. Just think of it. A century ago, computers as we know them today did not exist. The very idea totally inconceivable. We now find that the difficulties of cyber attacks, the proliferation of information that has all the appearance of truth but is often just cleverly disguised lies, disinformation ripping at the fabric of our society, it calls for a resurgence of critical thinking, a maturity in assessing every aspect of the world around us. It calls for skills greater than anything we've needed before. Here in Ukraine, it combines with an incredible war of physical brutality and attempts to inflict terror on the citizens by whatever means possible. The entire country is treated as a battlefield by the enemy. It requires total community involvement, a sense of personal initiative linked to community resolve that I have only seen truly in America until I came to Ukraine. Other countries like the UK, Germany, France, Japan, Australia, I'm sure also have great community involvement. Here in Ukraine, it is still very fragmented, chaotic. Many nonprofits, groups of citizens, especially young people, came together in 2022, some in 2014, and have been struggling to learn the ins and outs of how to get an efficient system running to help in times of disaster. This is where we have so much knowledge we could bring to bear and help them as they move forward. Now, bottom center on our slide are several examples of local community involvement in America under a nationally organized umbrella. In some cases, it's a nonprofit, like Red Cross, Salvation Army, or Team Rubicon that you see here, founded by military veterans not that many years ago. This group encompasses volunteers, often with military background, as well as officially designated kick-ass civilians like me, to put the skills learned for warfare to positive use in restoration following disasters. I hope to see more involvement in Ukraine by such organizations. Even better, I'd love to see a Ukrainian equivalent or a Ukrainian branch repurposing skills designed for destruction to tackle the enormous recovery ahead. CERT. This is part of a special volunteer group with government roots. The Community Emergency Response Team, CERT, educates its volunteers in local communities across America in disaster preparedness and response for the hazards that may occur where they live. They learn skills such as fire safety, light search and rescue operations, disaster medical operations, serving as a bridge to stabilize survivors until medical help arrives, not unlike the TCCC and CLS we were looking at earlier. Team organization under the FEMA's Incident Command System, official structure for emergency response. The CERT program offers a consistent nationwide approach to volunteer training and organization that professional responders can rely on during disaster situations, allowing them to focus on the more complex tasks. Other great organizations, some under government, some nonprofits. VOAD. This is the Voluntary Organization Active in Disaster. It serves as a kind of umbrella to coordinate, unify, provide guidance for many of the disaster response and recovery entities. VOAD operates chapters on a local or regional level, which may include both government agencies like Health and Human Services, as well as local branches of groups like Red Cross, and even smaller local groups that respond to local disasters, like church ministries. There is also national VOAD, or NVOAD, which helps oversee these efforts on a national, even international level, and works directly with government entities like FEMA. Besides the ones that its membership, besides the ones that we mentioned above, also includes Citizen Corps, which was established under the new Department of Homeland Security back in 2002, part of the USA Freedom Corps that provides training for the American people to be part of the recovery after a disaster or terrorist attack. Or, we should add, a war. On a local level, Citizen Corps Council partners with many organizations, volunteers, and businesses to organize responders, volunteers, and professionals, professional first responders, for an efficient response so that efforts are not wasted or being duplicated. By training in Incident Command System, volunteers know whom to report to and how the incident is organized. Citizen Corps includes, either as an official part or tangentially, the Medical Reserve Corps, which has both medical personnel and those that can serve in a staff-related position that operate in times of disaster in most local communities, sometimes serving as the medical help in an American Red Cross shelter, for example. AmeriCorps, which has young volunteers that have served in some incredible ways during disasters that I've been deployed to. The Civil Air Patrol, which is basically a civilian auxiliary for the Air Force, and they perform many operations during times of disaster, as do the ham radio operators. Now, this nonprofit group of ham aficionados, I've seen them also operating out of Red Cross shelters when normal communications have been destroyed or disrupted, and often referring emergency calls for people that need help to their own communications with the local fire department when 911 services have been disrupted. So there's many different kinds of groups, and to see some of these incorporated here in Ukraine would be wonderful. I have reached out to National VOAD to see if we might be able to find ways for VOAD itself to help Ukraine develop a similar structure. Our talks did not get very far, but hopefully that time will come. I'd also like to mention currently in Ukraine, Civilian use of ham radios is illegal under martial law since February of 2022. A ham radio operators group that operates under a government umbrella might help alleviate some of the loss of trained personnel and equipment that could be of use even now. Taking a look at some of the other pictures around here, I want to just give an idea of life for citizens here in Ukraine. Now, I have a special empathy for the many displaced Ukrainians within and beyond the borders of Ukraine. Until February of this year, my lifestyle was very much like a refugee since I first came here 3 years earlier. And because of the 90-day visa-free policy that allows me to stay up to 90 days in Ukraine, unfortunately, it also means that I need to uproot myself and move to a new country every 90 days. Life for me often had the outward appearance of normalcy, as the top right photos show in my apartment here in Bucha, which I did have a chance to live in for 90-day periods last year, but now is permanent residence for me here in Ukraine. Living for me, though, as you might see on the picture next to the building, on the far upper right, my apartment is right next to the stairwell, but next to me is an apartment missing a door, wide open, and still under major construction. Below me, in the picture below that one, you can see the blackened 3.5-year-old scars of occupation, a sight I still see every day walking down from my 5th-floor apartment. With power likely to go out unpredictably every day, I am avoiding the elevator once again. Grateful I'm not on the 9th floor. Next to that photo, the other chunk of my life is spent on trains. Some 14 or more hours between countries, because only warplanes, and precious few of those, fly in the silent skies of Ukraine for all these years. And the drones and the missiles more intermittently. Silent skies are peaceful skies, so I can't say that I miss the sound of aircraft, but this migratory period birthed a new lifestyle that lingers to this day. I am a nomadic minimalist, and I find a simpler way to live amid growing challenges to our deeply rooted way of life is actually a new normal that I plan to hold on to as much as possible without the constant traveling. My own housing still demands a certain degree of resilience and mobility, if only to leap out of bed many nights and migrate to my safe room this year with a fairly comfortable bed arrangement over the top of the bathtub. Almost all items of value are tucked in the bathroom nooks and crannies for safety. And still living in the aftermath of this tank strike, there is much in this building, as in many other places, in Bucha, but even more so throughout the nation, in need of repair. For Ukrainians, incredible patience, tolerance, endurance, illuminated by creative ways. From the forest of flags that we see on the left side, growing next to the Maidan metro in the photo below. Frequent underground refuge right in the heart of Kyiv. This is the new Ukrainian life, for now. Peace will come, and with it an even better life than what these people had before. They will fight, to be sure of that. Slide 14. What if the war were on American soil? I want to draw your attention to the maps below. On the right, you may recognize the Wolf Head of Lake Superior. I spent many happy years in this part of the country. Quite often, 2 years ago, I thought of the breathtaking drives along the famed North Shore, heading up towards Canada from Duluth, Minnesota, as our small humanitarian team from Kyiv drove food and supplies up to the babusias in villages that dotted the north woods of Kyivska Oblast, between Ukraine's capital and the Chernobyl exclusion zone, just below Belarus. We traveled the same road near the banks of the Dnipro River, heading up to the border, where the infamous tank columns barreled down towards Kyiv in February 2022 on its planned triumphant takeover of the capital. The comparison is so striking. These images are to scale, so it's very similar distances if you're familiar with that part of our gorgeous American shoreline. The heavily forested scenic shoreline highway along the western edge of Lake Superior in the remote areas of northern Minnesota, the sparse local population just coming out of hibernation before the hordes of tourists arrive. Suddenly, heavily armed enemy troops, including drone units, accompany more than 100 tanks rolling out of Thunder Bay, Canada, clogging the narrow road, eventually reaching to the outskirts of Duluth, Minnesota. All communication lines cut, cell towers downed, satellite signals jammed, drone swarms destroy each town's government offices, plants, power plants, water and sewage treatment facilities, stores, warehouses. Mayors and leading officials are targeted, forced to cooperate or be killed in the first day of the invasion. These were dilemmas faced by hundreds of small Ukrainian communities in the early months of 2022. Many communities, large and small, continue to face such challenges in this fourth year of the full-scale war. Think of your own small towns, rural communities. Could any of your towns defeat the attackers? How would they handle tanks trying to roll into town? How would they battle drone attacks? How would they protect citizens, children? Can they communicate with outside authorities? Does your emergency response plan cover foreign invasion? If you're thinking of an exercise, here are some possible injects you could include at various towns along the advancing route. Drones by the thousands destroying infrastructure. Destruction of homes, businesses, playgrounds, and schools, coupled with snipers randomly killing people, terrorizing the local populations. Missile strikes heavily damage military installations, fuel depots, manufacturing enterprises. All contact with the National Guard are down. Centers of government are captured, city officials forced to cooperate or be killed. Police stations are converted into well-used torture centers. Within 24 hours, the forces gained control of the shoreline highway and most towns in a line down to just outside of Duluth. Troops start infiltrating small communities throughout northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, surrounding Duluth to define a Canadian region of control. Many Canadian sympathizers, coordinated and well organized beforehand, practically give the keys of the towns to the advancing invaders. The Canadian Crimson Tide gradually spreads across Canada-leaning northern states. Vigilante groups take control of some urban areas, declaring allegiance to Canada. All of this is based on real-life events taking place these last several years in Ukraine. Additional food for thought. Ideas for better crisis intervention skills in a multi-year disaster and war zone setting. How drone warfare changes battlefield dynamics. When military and civilian forces must operate together, blurred lines are created when war is on your home soil. How will you handle that? Military and civilian coordination in a new global reality. Should young men be drafted? This is a major question in Ukraine. A huge consideration is the critical role of young adults in the reshaping of this transition period, this post-communist nation that's struggling to align itself with the West. Most of those voices for freedom are among the young adults. Notice we skipped the last bullet point. You have ESF 20 established for joint efforts with the military. Does it only cover National Guard activity or something entirely different? Do you plan revisions in light of potential war? What is emergency support function number 20? I thought they only had 15. So what is ESF number 20? The National Response Framework, NRF, has 15 official emergency support functions. ESF number 20 is not a standard federally recognized ESF. There is no standard set for ESF number 20 in a state or local context, which is where we find it. Most examples use it for discussing the state National Guard or cybersecurity. Emergency support function number 20 is typically defined at the state and local levels as military support or defense support to civil authorities. Its purpose is to coordinate the use of military assets, specifically the National Guard on state active duty during domestic emergencies and disasters, not in a traditional war context. If you're thinking of drafting an ESF 20 for your local jurisdiction, here are a few examples. Defense support to civil authorities. This addresses all requests for military support originated by the City of Auburn. Cybersecurity. It maintains the integrity of all the City of Tampa's electronic and technical capabilities. Or defense support to civil authorities. This is assistance available to civilian authorities in a disaster through the Washington State National Guard. Hawaii goes into considerable more detail for their state emergency support function, the SESF 20, military support. This coordinates and provides National Guard civil support. They make a point of adding, if there was any doubt, that the Guard members are not subject to the provisions of the Posse Comitatus Act, PCA. They say if active federal forces are utilized, this is beyond the state National Guard, efforts should be made to assign non-law enforcement missions to these forces to avoid violation of the PCA. Well, we kind of stumped on that one with Katrina, but that was an exception. So also is the possibility of war on our soil. But it can happen. Yeah, that guideline might be a little difficult to stick to in our scenario. My favorite, though, is from the city of Kirkland, Washington, part of their comprehensive emergency management plan, which begins with the word war used twice. The only document, ESF 20, or anything else within our national response framework that uses the word war. They mention both conventional and nuclear war, as well as acts of war. Under their ESF 20 section, defense support to civil authorities, it says, while military assistance generally seems to assume the state National Guard, the list of capabilities ends with these two: response to the use of weapons of mass destruction and coordination of other military services. Frankly, if I was leading the attack, I would take out the National Guard facilities, high priority. Good thing we have a gentle giant to the north for a neighbor. May it always be so. The southern U.S. land border, well, that's a whole nother matter. That may be where you would like to exercise the war scenario. I do hope you'll strongly consider establishing one. Slide 15, partnering with Ukraine. We've covered many of the challenges and some pleasant surprises to navigating Ukraine. This section is just an overview with more up-to-date information and active links on the Telegram channel. Now, if that doesn't work for you, you can connect with me by any of the apps or by email. They'll be on the last slide here. I'll be happy to forward information to you. Remember, communication is always key. While many Ukrainians in the major cities speak some English, and it is in the process of becoming an official international language by law, it's often still a struggle to effectively communicate, especially if you have business purposes and need to communicate on a deeper level. There are many organizations, government agencies, businesses, even the American Chamber of Commerce that can help smooth the way. Bringing or hiring your own interpreter is certainly a consideration. There's often a shortage of interpreters at any price. Working with local partners as much as possible, especially with a good command of English, is a strong recommendation. Keep in mind that there are many Ukrainians and organizations in America that will gladly help you bring your skills to Ukraine or find you local partners here that may help you connect remotely. All that said, if this is a more casual trip to get the feel for Ukraine, you'll find people everywhere with a basic knowledge of some English. That and a few key phrases in Google Translate will meet most every need you may have. And they do still value their American friends. Most Ukrainians are quite willing to separate the genuine Americans they meet from the political posturing. Perhaps surprisingly, tourists are coming, and there are a number of tour guides and packages that give you legitimate reason to enter the country. For comprehensive, frequently updated guidelines on traveling to Ukraine, the website Visit Ukraine is your best source. Again, I'm glad to help colleagues navigate the logistics of traveling to Ukraine. Exploring possibilities for doing business may be what many of you have in mind, and this is not my area of expertise, I'll be frank. But I have rounded up some of the experts that I've spoken to over recent years, especially in the 2024 Rebuild Ukraine conference, which I strongly recommend you consider attending if you're interested in the work in Ukraine. It's held annually in Warsaw about the middle of November, just about now, in fact. We've discussed a lot of the challenges of working in wartime Ukraine. I have been going through a number of the recent IAEM magazines and finding articles, a few of them listed here, with ideas that could really help make a difference here in Ukraine. We've got a lot of great knowledge in our association within the emergency management community, and I hope to see much of that knowledge put into effect here in Ukraine. A place to test innovative ideas. In a Kyiv Independent op-ed, How to Enter Ukraine's Defense Market, a short guide for foreign companies, it states, Ukraine's defense market is not just a place to sell, it is a place to stand. The country is fighting for its survival and rebuilding its defense industry at the same time. It welcomes foreign cooperation, but on its own terms. Transparency, localization, wartime readiness, and shared strategic vision. In this hub of innovation and green solutions for both war and peace, many discover renewed meaning to a life well lived with purpose and renewed energy, vitality, a fresh start, recalibrating the meaningful elements of living well. Life and work and leisure pursuits continue with an intense appreciation for the freedom and ability to do so here in Ukraine. On the far right side, you can see one of the many banners that line Maidan here in the center, the heart of Kyiv. The banner states Kyiv is waiting for you after the victory. But I see action now, development now, everywhere here. War or peace, it's all about timing. The perfect timing for you, for Ukraine. Slide 16, expectations met. And hopefully your expectations have been met and exceeded in this presentation, an expanded version of the 45-minute presentation that I gave during early edition. We covered America and Ukraine, the similarities and the differences, especially given this wartime scenario. We've done an inside perspective of the opportunities and challenges that await you in Ukraine, should you decide to be a part of the effort here. We've done a deep dive into transportation, communication, and housing. Disruptions in the flow of humanitarian aid. Sadly, this is an area that still is in need of a lot of work, especially before the next large global disaster. The problems that we're run into are not just for Ukraine, but are endemic throughout the response system. And we are in need of new ways to approach disasters, especially from the grassroots on up. Building a resilient nation. We've taken a look at this from a military and a civilian standpoint. And then we explored the dark scenario. What if the war were fought on American soil? I hope that gave you some points worth considering and thinking about as you do your risk planning and analysis. Finally, we took a brief look at partnering with Ukraine. There's a lot of room for growth here, so if this is something you're interested in, either now or in the peacetime to come, please be sure to reach out to me. And we'll cover that in the last slide. I want to mention briefly that rather than this handout, Navigating the Situation in Ukraine 2025, I've set up a Telegram channel, which I hope you'll be able to make use of and get familiar with one of the most popular apps that we have here in Ukraine, the main source for a lot of the news that we get and for a lot of the action that comes out of the military and the government, as well as news media and individuals throughout the area. In the app, I'll be forwarding information in the news and any major analysis or developments that are of pertinent interest, especially to emergency managers. So this will be ongoing updates that will be specifically for you. I hope you'll take advantage of it. You'll also have the ability to comment and submit information of your own. If you see something you think would be worthwhile to the rest of the community, please be sure to share that. Any questions, comments, or discussions you want to open up, let's get the brainstorming going. And to wrap it up, moving forward. My main contact information you'll find on this page. WhatsApp, Signal, as well as my Telegram channels. And if you reach out to me, I will send you both the QR code and a link to access the private Telegram channel that I'm setting up for our emergency management community. That would be a great place to pose any questions, introduce material that you believe is pertinent to the discussion, and let's continue the discussion on into the future. For now, you can reach me via Signal or WhatsApp. My email, llwilsonglobal@gmail.com. Also, I check all of these every day, so you can reach me with the one that's most convenient for you. If you have a chance, I suggest you check out my Resilient Village Ukraine videos on YouTube. These get more into the discussion of the actual resilient village concept and the developments that we've done over the first 3 years. In the time since early this summer, most of my attention, given the situation with my platoon, has been devoted more to chaplain work, to crisis response, to defusing some really dangerous situations, and to developing stronger ties with the military. There is a huge need, especially for support for international soldiers that are coming over here. I have a number of contacts that have been opening up, and this seems to be the area where a lot of my work needs to be concentrated right now. But I am still hoping to get the first actual resilient village built. And at this point, we're planning on that for international soldiers to give them basically a home in this country where they're serving. Their situation is quite difficult without a place to call home besides the military installations where they're assigned. So this would be, what we like to do is cradle to grave for incoming international soldiers, and eventually expand this for Ukrainian soldiers as well. And from these village communications, that's where we plan to be teaching a lot of the American disaster and combat response that we are so good at doing in America and which is so desperately needed in a country like Ukraine. I hope you'll consider being part of this, and please reach out to me. I'd be happy to discuss any of this with you.